and welcome to everyone to GW Prime Live. Your where is here. This is Nibedita Mohanta, your host for today's session, and today we are thrilled to have with us Awais Ahmed, founder and CEO Pixxel, as our guest for the show. Welcome to GW Prime Live.
Hi, Nibali. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Founded in 2019, Pixxel is an Indian space tech startup which is building a constellation of hyperspectral imaging satellites and aims to become the pioneer of Earth monitor capabilities. Pixxel has recently built the world's highest resolution hyperspectral satellite constellation and successfully launched three of the satellites from its Firefly constellation, and the additional three satellites are scheduled to launch in the second quarter of 2025. With this, let us begin today's conversation. So, what inspired you to venture into hyperspectral imaging technology, and how do you see its role in shaping India's space tech ecosystem?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the story goes back about 6 years now, early 2019. I'd just come out of a couple of very interesting experiences building hardware at my alma mater, BITS Pilani, which was a student satellite team called Team Anant and then the Hyperloop India team. I think both of those competitions had given me the confidence to be able to say, okay, maybe we can go ahead and build our own satellite as well, or build something in space, because space has always been like an obsession and a love since childhood. But the first thing that we did was we looked at all the different ways in which we could contribute to the furthering of the space technology and what could be built. Quite a few companies were building rockets, quite a few companies wanted to build space stations and satellites of different kinds and so on. But as college students, which we still were at that point in time, it was hard to be able to say we will build hardware in the first go. It requires money, a lot more money than a student is able to come up with at any given point of
Right.
time. Um, but satellite data was something that was starting to come down from space in loads and loads of quantities. And there were not enough companies, not enough people making use of that to convert the data, the imagery into useful insights. There were a few that had recently come out around 2019, but they were predominantly concentrated in North America, in Europe. No, not in India, not in Asia, and so on. Not enough of them. So the first thing we did was we said, okay, let's see all of this data that's coming down. Let's see what we can analyze, and that's where we came across the concept of the three resolutions you talk about when you talk about space: spatial resolution, temporal, and spectral. Which basically means spatially how clearly can you see things, temporally how frequently can you come back and revisit a place, and spectrally how much more beyond human eyesight and the visible range can you go and see things. The spatial and temporal resolution aspects were something that were already solved by some companies that were launching satellites for the last 1, 2, 3 decades. But what was missing was there were a lot of these invisible problems that you couldn't see with just normal satellites or cameras or human eyes. Things like pest infestations or crop diseases, things like oil and gas leaks, being able to look at the biodiversity content of the forests, what is the amount of carbon that is being sequestered, the pollution levels, exactly which chemical is where. So these were invisible problems that existing satellites couldn't see. And so we needed to find a way to see the unseen. And that would be possible by expanding on the spectral resolution. How many spectra or wavelengths of light could you actually capture? The best that existing satellites in 2019 could do was around 10 or lesser than 10, but you needed really in more than 100 of them. And so that's the gap that we saw. And we said, okay, probably Pixxel can build and deploy our own constellation of hyperspectral satellites where you're adding the hyper activity to the spectral resolution aspect, capturing data in hundreds of wavelengths while not compromising on the other two resolutions and other quality aspects. And so we said we will build our own constellation of hyperspectral imaging satellites. That's what we are doing. Three demo satellites launched the last 3 years, and finally, in the last couple of weeks, we have launched three fully functioning commercial satellites, which will be followed up by three more in the next few months.
Perfect. Like you shared about your journey of your startup, can you please shed some light on the key milestones and the challenges that you faced and the breakthroughs in developing the hyperspectral imaging solutions?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was obviously building hardware is tough, like really, really tough, and especially if it has to go to space and survive in space. So the first challenge that we had was how do we build a camera? We are a team that had not built something that had gone to space before. So the one thing we did was we surrounded ourselves with people who had retired from ISRO, from other space organizations, who could help us and guide us in building these things. And we said, let's look at it from first principles. Basically, have the optics, the detector, the electronics. We just need to find a way to put these three together in a very cutting edge way and in a new way, so that the hyperspectral nature of the world could be seen with these cameras. So the first milestone was building our first demo satellite. We wanted to very quickly show to the world, to our customers, to potential future investors, to the employees, to our partners, to the governments, that Pixxel as a team could build and deploy a hyperspectral satellite. And the first one didn't have to do everything we needed to do eventually. It just had to prove the concept. It needed to prove that the viability of our team doing it. So the first big milestone after we started was building the camera, the hyperspectral camera that showed that the approach that we were taking to building these cameras worked on ground. And second, more importantly, it was showing that it worked in space. And so on April 1st, 2022, when we launched Shakuntala, which also was India's first ever private imaging satellite launch, I think that was the biggest milestone that showed the world that I think this is a team that has figured out how to send stuff to space and how to beam down data and do that. And then we followed it up with a couple of more satellites. So it was not a one-time fluke. It was something that the team had now learned to do very regularly and without any hiccups as such. So I think the other milestones in between are obviously raising funding. It's a very capital intensive business, at least for the first few
Right.
years where you're building and launching these satellites. So being able to raise our first pre-seed round of about $700,000 from angel investors, predominantly from our university, that got us started. Big milestone, because without that, we couldn't even have built anything. And then the seed round of about 7.3 million, where we were able to get Lightspeed and Bloom as partners, that enabled us to then build and launch the other two demo satellites for the total of three. And then with the Series A and Series B, that brings our total investment to about 95 million now. I think that fully gives us all the capital we need to launch the commercial satellites, generate revenue, get to self-sustainability. So yeah, I think the two, my major milestones were on the fundraising front and the technological front. And finally, there have been business milestones as well, being able to sign with the Ministry of Agriculture, being able to work with British Petroleum, being able to work with Rio Tinto, and finally, with NASA and Ministry of Agriculture and so on. I think all those have helped show that it's not just cool technology; it's technology that there is real world use for.
So, how does this technology contribute to addressing pressing challenges like climate change, agriculture sustainability, and disaster management in India and around the globe?
Yeah, so the hyperspectral nature of it, the spectral resolution that we bring, the 150 wavelengths to be precise, help us see some things that otherwise you would not have been able to see with pertaining to these problems. Maybe let me take an example. So let's say that there is a lake somewhere in India, and that industries and factories have been polluting into. And on the other side, people use it for growing food, for drinking water, and so on. So there needs to be a way to be able to figure out what chemicals are coming from where, which factories are emitting that, what is the quantity, how has that been changing, and how is that translating into it in terms of its pollution into the food that is being grown with the water there, and so on. So with a normal satellite image that would have existed pre 2019 or pre Pixel's hyperspectral satellites, you would have been able to see only if it got dirty, right? If the water has become blackish or things like that. And sometimes even
Right.
if it is hazardous, you won't, it doesn't change color. So what you need to be able to see exactly which chemical, which pollutant is present. Out of the 150 wavelengths, there are 20 or 30 wavelengths that specifically will tell you that if you're able to draw out a spectral curve, this is the specific chemical constituent that's coming in. That's one example. Maybe let's look at one more where there is a oil and gas pipeline. There are two pipelines, let's say one above the ground, one under the ground. Above the ground pipeline is carrying methane, and methane is leaking, but methane happens to be invisible. You can't see it with human eyes, you
Right.
can't see it with
Right.
normal satellites, but it shines, like really shines bright, because its reflectance is in the 1600 to 700 nanometer range, which our hyperspectral cameras will be able to sort of detect, right? So the invisible becomes visible. We're able to see the unseen with this. So that's one example. But even if it's an underground oil leak, even if you can't see it directly, what it does is it changes the parameters of the soil right above it. So we can look at the vegetation, grass, the soil, and say, okay, the chemical composition here has changed because the curve has changed, and therefore there's likely an oil leak here. So a few examples of how we can help detect when things are being emitted into the environment that are not good, keep monitoring them as and when they happen, and curb those problems early on.
So now that you mentioned about this the problem solving aspect of it, uh, what industries or sectors are you primarily focusing, and how have you tailored your hyperspectral products for these markets?
Yeah, so I think we talked about the oil and gas industry, which is going to be a big user of this for being able to detect leaks. We talked about the pollution aspect. So predominantly governments, municipalities, corporations would want to keep a track of large areas of land. But I think the most number of our customers today come from agriculture. There's a lot
Mhm.
of demand for being able to detect soil nutrient content and identify which nutrient is missing. There's a lot of demand for identifying which crop species is growing where, at what point in time, what is its phenology at different given points in time, how healthy it is, as well as being able to identify very specific types of crop diseases and pest infestations, especially before any symptoms show up in those crops. So we have, I think, about 40% of all the customers we have signed are in the agriculture domain, from North America, from Europe, from India, from Australia, that will use this. The number of wavelengths out of the 150, there are about 60 or 70 of those wavelengths that we need to choose for hyperspectral. But there's no customization we need to do. The satellites are all the same, the hardware is all the same. The customization only happens when you're analyzing it, when you're choosing, okay, out of these 150 wavelengths that the camera has captured, which of these wavelengths now we will use to extract what type of insight for agriculture. Similarly, it goes for the oil and gas leaks. There's also quite a few use cases and industries around forestry management, biodiversity, carbon sequestration. There's a lot of people paying for carbon credits, being able to plant trees, being able to see how much carbon is being sequestered. So I think predominantly around vegetation, whether that's crops or forests, that's where the biggest chunk of our customers and use cases come from, and followed by oil and gas. Mining is a big one where companies use our data to help not only identify where unique minerals might be, rare earth metals minerals might be, as well as being able to monitor both active and closed mines for any potential leaks, any other harm to the environment. We can very accurately quantify the amount of damage that these activities are causing, which go into these reports that they need to deliver, both from the company end but also from the government end. So these are a few of the industries. I would probably say agriculture, oil and gas, and mining on the resources side, and then finally the governments for a variety of different use cases on pollution and forestry and so on.
How is this technology contributing in strengthening India's downstream space sector, particularly in enabling actionable insights for industries like agriculture, urban planning, and natural resource management?
Yeah, I think that's something that there needs to be a lot of work that still needs to go in. But I think the good thing about India is there is a lot of downstream companies and organizations already working. The lack of technology was India's own upstream data provisions. Only ISRO was launching satellites that was providing data to ISRO's other arms and some other government agencies, and they were using it for some purposes, and it wasn't really widespread. So I think one, we will continue to work with different regional remote sensing centers, the National Remote Sensing Center, whose job is to take data, analyze it, and provide solutions. But alongside that, work with ministries directly. A lot of ministries want solutions. They don't even want to know which data it is being, is being used for the
Right.
analysis, whether it's from satellites or drones or airplanes. They want to know, like, if it's Ministry of Mines, they want to know, tell me where the minerals are and tell me what environmental impact it is having. If you're talking about the oil and gas ministry, they want to know basically where there might be new fields or what leaks are happening and so on. For the forestry ministry, they would like to know how is the forest cover of the country changing or a particular state changing. So we will provide the data. The lack of hyperspectral data was something that was there globally, including in India. So that is alleviated with our data, and our platform called Aurora, which we hope will help make analysis easier. So in most cases, our customers don't have the internal expertise to analyze satellite imagery and say, okay, this is a hyperspectral data cube, but how do we actually maneuver it, manipulate it, and extract insights? And that's something that Aurora removes out of the way. Anyone can go there, search on a Google map or Earth-like interface, and then be able to figure out what they need, and they can use a model that we have built. For example, let's say a municipal corporation wants to know the water quality of all the lakes in the city. They don't have to sit and figure out what model should we use. Should we use a AI model, ML model? Should we use mathematical statistical model. None of that. They basically can go, they can select the area or all the lakes, and they can basically click on water quality index, and our platform will generate it for them. So that's one way where we hope it gets easier to use. But in cases where customers just want data, we'll provide the data and get out of the way. So it depends on how deeply a customer wants us to engage with them and provide it to them. But there's a lot of scope for using the existing mechanisms India has, but there needs to be a lot many more private players also in this sector on the downstream side. Every industry requires its own customizations. Almost every geography has its own unique challenges, and the more folks focusing on their own niche, the better it will be, because the solutions can then be more tailored.
Right. So this brings me to the last question. So what are your long-term goals for expanding your capabilities, like launching new satellites or enhancing data resolution and analytics?
Both, I would say. I think one, six fireflies are launching this year. There'll be one honeybee, which is the next version of larger satellites, which will expand our wavelength range. That is also launching hopefully before the end of this year. Um, we will follow it up with six more honeybees and six more fireflies in the next year, which is 2026. And then maybe we will see, depending on the demand and supply, what we need to do in terms of more satellites in 2027. But there's at least 12 satellites more that are coming, even beyond the four additional satellite launches that are happening apart from the three that happened a couple of weeks ago. That's one. Second is, as you mentioned, we will focus on more of the analytics as well. Like, the data is there, but there's just so many use cases and so many different geographies which each require its own tweaks, that we will continue to roll out more and more models to make it easier and easier for our customers to extract the data. So I think it will be both expand outwards or upstream with more satellites, and expand downstream with more models, so that we can capture the large chunk of the market and also grow it. Beyond that, we also build and provide satellites to other organizations. We are working with the Indian Air Force on the IDEX program to provide them with a 150 kg multi payload modular satellite, of which there will be many more that we will need to replicate. And there are a few other partners as well that will be providing some satellites to. So yeah, I think those are the future expansion plans for the next 5 years. Keep our heads down, launch more satellites up to space, and more data will lead to more solutions and analytics, which can hopefully help people on the ground.
And lastly, any message you would like to give to those aspiring space tech startup or those who want to start their career in this field?
Yeah, I think those who want to start up in the space, it's never been a better time. India is at a very unique juncture. It's very early that there have not been any large incumbents that have established themselves so big that you can't replace them, and the opportunities are just going to continue to grow. And if you're starting today with a good problem set and a good team that can build a unique technological solution, I think no time better than that. But eventually, I think one has to be used to the risk. It could always, no matter how right you do things, some things could always go wrong in a startup. But I would basically tell, if you're interested in this sector and you feel like you're starting up, just get started, be curious, follow what is passionate, but make sure that there's also a business case attached to it. And for anyone else that wants to work in this sector, there's no dearth of opportunities today. Apart from ISRO, there are now so many private companies that have done well, where you can join and start contributing right away without having to wait many years or decades to get to a managerial position where you can actually make impact. So yeah, if you're curious about this sector and there's something that you love, get started one way or the other, and it's never been a better time.
Well, thank you, Awais, for your time and for this insightful conversation. And all the very best for the future launches. I
Thank
had a
you so much.
great time talking to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.